Hey, welcome back. Good to see you both. First, I'd like to know, how are you doing? How are you doing, Kelly?
I'm doing great.
We just had this like we
Don't
just had
trash
this
me.
like long backstory conversation, and that's all you're gonna give me is you're doing great.
I'm doing great.
Yeah. How's life
Yeah.
on up in Victoria?
The weather's been incredible. People have really tried to stay home. And for the country, I think British Columbia is doing really well as far as the COVID numbers go and cases. And yeah, I mean, that's the priority of everyone. Stay home and stay safe and stay healthy. And we've incredible weather the last, 2 weeks, and the gas prices are low, and so those are the main things. I mean,
So you've been
you're not supposed
driving.
to, you're not supposed to go anywhere, so you fill up your tank and it just sits there. But the idea is there.
Yeah. Well, you've probably been driving out to Souk. Yeah. See your mom out in Souk.
Yeah, I've been driving out to Souk. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So the
yeah.
the good old truck is getting better gas mileage these days.
You bet.
Yeah. How about you, Hans? How's life up on Capitol Hill?
It's great. I'll repeat Kelly's response. I've just been at home, so it's fine. My home is fine. My cat had a cone on its head because it got some surgery, and now the cone is gone. That's the most exciting thing that's happened to me all month.
And you had a birthday.
Oh, and it was my birthday. I turned 30.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good for me.
Wow, good for you.
Congratulations. I made it.
You made it.
You made
You
it.
made it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice. Okay. So since last time we talked, we've put out a couple pieces. Kelly's been busy working on some edits, and you've been working on some audio edits, and I've been doing some other edits. But we featured, so we first came out with Nikita's piece, and then this week we dropped Mary Gwen's profile piece. Kelly, can you walk me through? Those are both kind of two different individuals, different styles, different backgrounds, different personality. What was it like kind of going back to back with those? And then are there any things that you found from them that you're like, man, I really enjoy their story? Like what are those elements?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because they are coming from, well, different parts of the US, and they came to Souk to fight during West Coast Wonder Woman tournament. They have different stories, different reasons to fight. And, Nikita, she was talking about how it was her first fight, and how she can't get a fight in Seattle. And Mary Gwen, she's had about 40 fights in her life, and has been boxing for 9 years. So two very different people. And Mary Gwen also owns a boxing gym, which is cool in Utah. So their stories are different. And I guess with these pieces, what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of introduce people to some of the fighters and just show like some of the reasons people are fighting, so what I'm trying to do is not, show everything. The whole point is to kind of give a taste. And it's also to find a little story in each of the stories that I could tell in under a minute, which is, so that angle. So what's the angle with each? And yeah, Nikita, like I said, that the story with her is really, or part of the story is that she finally got to fight someone. And she actually had 2 fights that weekend that we filmed. And Mary Gwen also had 2 fights. And she was fighting our Canadian national
Champion.
right?
Yeah.
Champion. And so that was interesting. And she was being coached by Eliza.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was an interesting angle there. Because Eliza has her own story.
Yeah.
So we'll get to meet her and kind of learn about her later on as we go through this process.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you found the line about Mary Gwen saying that she's been boxing long enough that she started where a coach told her that women don't box, to now she's having females corner her at competition and at fights, and then you show Eliza, I'm pretty sure she's a world heavyweight champion or world champion at some point. I mean, I know she's a world champion. I just don't know the proper. I think it's a heavyweight champion, but yeah, Eliza's a firecracker. But them interacting is super fascinating to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
Yeah. So what I'd be curious to know, like stylistically, the pieces are they're very different, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess with this whole thing, I'm really trying to show that. I mean, when I'm editing, I always let the subject matter kind of dictate. I'd say when I'm filming, I let the subject matter dictate how I film, and when
Yep.
I'm editing, certainly I try to let the subject matter dictate how I'm editing. So they're very, very different people, and what they said, you interviewed them, and what they said in the interviews was very different, and the vibe was different. And so to me, I just try to let that organically come out in the edit. So the music I choose, and just like the style of the way I'm editing it together, I just try and make it look unique. And I think as we go, I mean, there's going to be a lot of these pieces, and I hope people will enjoy this, being introduced to some of the boxers. And I hope that at the end of it, each piece is very different and very kind of representative, at least of what happened there in Souk with those boxers.
Yeah. And I know our hope is to go, like currently we're not traveling, but to travel to go see these women where they live. And so I imagine that their lives are all very different. I mean, I know their lives are all very different. And so that, like, some of that style hopefully is going to then carry over from these pieces to, like, what we see in Utah is very different than what we see with Nikita in Seattle, and what we see with Citlali in Mexico, or Coachella Valley, right?
Yeah, I mean, even you filmed some of Nikita boxing or training in Seattle, and even that gym we know is going to be totally different than what Mary Gwynn is dealing with, right?
Yep. Yeah, totally. How about you, Han? So you're working on some audio pieces. Tell me, like, what you've worked on, what you put out, kind of what that's been like.
Yeah, so I'm editing down some of the interviews that you've done, Jeff, with some of the boxers, and also with some other. So you spoke to Maggie Mertens, who's a journalist. She's written for The Atlantic about the Women's World Cup, ESPNW. She's done a lot of stuff for different publications. She's based here in Seattle. She's founder of Bitterroot magazine, which the piece that you wrote up about the first second West Coast Wonder Woman, but the first one that you went to, it appeared in Bitterroot magazine.
For the record, that we went to.
Yes, that we went to. I was also there, I suppose. And Kelly, you also were there, huh?
We were all there. It sounds so formal. We were all there.
And I think that piece was really interesting. We get a lot of these like individual experiences, which I think are really important, and collectively they make this larger story, right? The story of Nikita, the story of Mary Gwynn, the story of Citlali. They're all kind of, as Kelly alluded to, kind of like living in these different places and doing this work in different places, and they have very different stories. But the Maggie Mertens was really interesting. This interview that I'm cutting up right now is really interesting to me, because she has this perspective of kind of looking at it from kind of like a macro level, like zooming out, and here's kind of like what the history of like women's boxing has been, and kind of here's a little bit about like how, I think one of the most interesting points she made at the end of the interview is about how women's boxing both changes the perception of people who watch it, and then also the people who are boxing, right? Of like this kind of feeling of being involved in like a really intense contact sport, and how that can, I don't know, change. I think, and this was like echoed by Ellen in some interviews that we did with her, and like a lot of the other boxers, that it like changed how people who are boxing thought of themselves, if that makes sense. Like, especially, I think, just think of Ellen's story and how she was coming out of this divorce and didn't think that she could like do it, and then she did it, and then it became so like foundational, like such a foundation to her future, that she like incorporated it into her life and made it her thing. And so this interview with Maggie Mertens really like echoed that, and and in that interview, we also, I guess you and Maggie kind of talked about the pandemic and like the future of women's sports and kind of like where the money is and these like bigger questions in how society like interacts with women athletes. So I've been cutting up that's been pretty interesting. Working on the interviews with Nikita and Lolly. And yeah, I've just kind of have started into that. So I don't have a ton of info, like I don't have a ton of thought about it yet, but yeah.
What do you think the most compelling piece or part of like the conversations with Nikita or Mary Gwynn have been?
Well, that's the thing is, can I get back to you on that one? Sorry, can we cut this part?
You can cut it as well. No, I mean, like, I just think like, I'll tell you the one thing that's interesting about Mary Gwynn that I had a conversation with, that if you haven't listened to all the tape, as Hans would say, in radio world, was fascinating is that, she turned pro, and I won't give away all the things, but she turned pro for some very specific reasons. And she had 2 fights that were lined up for the next 8 weeks. So her goal is to be, I think she said, a world champion or a title holder in the next 2 years. And so that's her goal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I was actually very curious to know what's going on with her when I was cutting her piece. So it's like,
yeah.
I wonder what's happening now. Because
for everyone who's like just getting to know Mary Gwynn, her Instagram's super interesting because she just also started, like, she's been really, she's like really in touch and in tune with how people interact culturally, and has started a new project. I believe it's like Put a Face to It, where she's trying to identify people who are dying because of COVID-19. And I think, it's been really interesting. She's a quality human being. And so I think in the original interview with her, she talked about boxing as being a tool to engage with people, and to use that as a way to build community. And now that she's a pro, there's all these ways that she's trying to do that. But in order to do that, she needs to be good as a pro. And so she had 2 fights lined up, but her mentality right now is like, I don't have those fights, but I'm essentially in training camp. Like, I'm using this time to get better at what I can get better at, so that as soon as the opportunity arises for me to fight, I'm going to be the first person to fight. And hopefully I can get a really good fight right out of the gate and I perform really well. And that just propels me on. So she's like, I'm not taking time off. I'm not, like, this is my mentality. And that was super interesting.
That's a great outlook.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Yeah. And I think, that compared to like Lolly, who, conversation with her, she's back at home. And so life has been completely upended. Mary Gwynn turned pro. Lolly is debating turning pro. So you just have these things happening where some people are having to 100% reevaluate, and some people have made plans and are just like, I'm on my way.
So what's the turning pro? What is that all about?
Well, so I need to go ahead.
I was just wondering if you could just explain turning pro. Like, what is the purpose? Do you know what the premise is? Is it to get paid? Is it to get better fights?
Well, so the trick is like, there's only been a few female fighters who have really been profitable. And the best way you can be profitable is to be a professional boxer, but because you can get paid and it doesn't matter where your money comes from. But in the Olympics, boxing was introduced in 2012, the London Games. And at the time, and I don't know all the specifics, but as a male, I don't believe you can be a professional boxer and be in the Olympics. It's an amateur sport. And so, like, one of the biggest names out there, Clarissa Shields, she was 17. She went and won the Olympics. There's an amazing documentary called T-Rex on her. and she thought, she got all this publicity, hoping that she was going to make some money off of that, endorsements. Olympics are kind of the biggest promotional piece for anybody who's kind of in a sport that's kind of underlying, which Megan and I talked about in our interview. And Clarissa Shields didn't really make any money from endorsements. There's a lot to unpack in that. She's Black. She's from Flint, Michigan. She didn't fit the model that a lot of businesses wanted as an Olympic athlete. But she was the first gold medalist for the United States in boxing. So ever for women's boxing. So there was a big fight for her to try to figure out how to make some money. I think she may have turned pro before the Brazil Olympics or immediately after. It must have been immediately after, but she was kind of the new face of boxers coming through the Olympics, getting some notoriety, using that to turn pro. And so like Mary Gwynn can't get paid to fight if she doesn't turn pro. But then that takes her away from, so Mary Gwynn was like waiting all the way up until if she could qualify for the Olympics, knowing that if she qualified, she'd be an amateur for the Olympics. And if she didn't qualify, she was going to turn pro. So Lolly qualified, was getting ready to go to this last tournament to actually go to the Olympics. And she's now waiting. So the Olympics are postponed. So now she's waiting, but is deciding if she should turn pro or not. Knowing that has ramifications. Like she might not be eligible for the Olympics if she turns pro, but she can maybe make money. The Olympics, if she's in the Olympics, could be really good publicity if she wins a gold medal. It's easier to get fights after that if you're a gold medalist. So it's this like really weighty business decision for a 19-year-old. And Mary Gwynn's been doing it for 9 years. She's 37. She's not eligible after 40 to be in the Olympics. So, yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah. And you and Maggie talked about that, which I thought was really interesting. Like the financial incentive of going pro and then everyone having to wait a year as an amateur and not making money.
Yeah.
It just seemed really like, I guess, I'd never thought about that necessarily of just like how I was just like, oh, people will have to wait a year, but it's like so much of their, you have to hit the window just right for your age. And then you have to jump in, and then you want to make money and you want to, I don't know. It's like all these, it's like so complicated.
So complicated because even like Megan Rapinoe from Seattle, who's the captain for the U.S. women's national team, like one of the best football players in the world. The most exposure she gets is during a World Cup year and then an Olympic year, and those are back to back. And so her endorsement deals is where she makes all her money. The soccer, like she's a paid professional soccer player, and her paycheck is actually not very big because the NWSL doesn't pay a lot for their players. The Olympics is the endorsement deals, Nike, that's where they make their money. So someone like Megan is still making money maybe during this time because of endorsement deals. But a lot of these women, if you're a cross country runner and you were planning to go to the Olympics, like you have to train for another year and you can't make any money. Like you have a job and like, it's a weird restructuring of priorities. Right. How do you pay? You're essentially you've been out of work because you've been training. And some of them, if you're on the national team, you get some benefits. Like sometimes you get housing and sometimes you get a stipend. Like some of that's paid for, but unless you're on the national team, you usually don't have any money. It's all on your own dime. So it's a little bit like filmmaking to some extent because like how do we make a project?
Good segue.
I'm just saying like funding, it's very similar, right? You're like, how do we pay for this? I'd be curious to know, Kelly.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know. You've done some films up quite a bit of work up in Victoria. Several small pieces, short pieces. Canada's a Drag is a CBC series that you've done several pieces on. But like, how do you find most of your funding as a filmmaker?
Oh man. Oh, it totally depends what role I'm in the film, for sure. I could be hired as, sometimes I'm hired as a producer plus something else. It could be my own project. It
Yeah.
could be like, I've worked in so many different kind of different levels with it. So I could be hired just as a cinematographer on a film.
Yep.
So then I'm not the one getting the funding, it's someone hiring me. Some of the projects I've worked on, they've gotten grant funding. So, and then some of them that I've worked on, people have self-funded stuff. So, they wanted to make a short film, or they wanted to make whatever. So they did their day job. They came up with,
Yep.
some money. And then they hired me in some capacity on the film. So I've done different roles. I've done directing, producing, cinematography, and editing. And oftentimes I'll do multiple things on one film.
Yep. Yep. You also have kind of a rental house there in Victoria. Yeah.
Yeah, I do camera gear rentals. I'm the only rental house on Vancouver Island just for filmmakers, that's focused on filmmakers. And part of it is I shoot and edit for a living, and then I do camera gear reviews on YouTube. I have my own channel, and so I know a lot about gear. I know all the manufacturers, and so it just made sense. We have one rental house here that's for photographers mostly.
Yep.
They don't really know about so much video gear or how to use it, and I don't think that's like their high priority. They're photographers. They're like black and white film photographers that started this business, and they also do camera rentals. So I filled that gap, and it's been big, especially for people coming from out of town, because there's no gear here. So even just grip gear, renting C-stands and lights, and that people come, on a plane. When they used to come on a plane.
Yeah. When they used to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so like for some of your own personal stuff, like are there any projects that you've like shot? Like, how did you get into working with CBC, or, working with some of these smaller personal, like pretty intimate pieces?
Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that I do, like I've been shooting video and editing and stuff. I learned how to shoot and edit at the same time. And I've been doing it. Some people just learn to shoot and they never learn to edit, and some people, but I learned at the same time to do both. So I've always done both. And so like I said, I shoot and edit for a living. So I've worked for a lot of different people, a lot of big corporations, and a lot of businesses. And so what I used to do was I would take the paycheck from, this bigger corporate client or government, because we're in a government town here. We're in the capital city for British Columbia, Victoria is. And I would take that money, and then I would buy my gear, and do shoots for smaller projects that are passion projects, that are smaller businesses or people. Telling their stories. Storytelling is my main passion. That's the thing I'm most interested in, is with video, is telling sort of untold stories. And so that was really my focus. I was like, even though I'm doing this work that probably people don't see, for these other clients, I'm taking that cash and then self-funding my own, experimental piece, my own, whatever I'm working on, short films, little documentary films. And then, it's about meeting people, and it's about word of mouth. I was shooting one film that's gone to, I think it's 9 different film festivals. It's been picked up. I shot it over a year. It's 3 minutes long. And I had to shoot it over a year because it's a profile. It's a film about someone who he sews, he does drag, and he does set design, and he works in the film business. So he's a very talented human being. And I thought, you need a piece about you, because I don't know anyone that does all these things. 5 things so well, right? And so I had to shoot it over a year, because he would do set design for a piece that was really amazing in October, and then he was doing something else in December, and then he was doing something in the summer. And then on that shoot, while I was filming, I met someone who had just been selected by CBC
Okay.
for Canada's a Drag, and they saw me filming, and then they said, well, I'm looking to find a filmmaker. And so that's how that happened. And so
Gotcha.
it is about kind of how, and then I met the CBC people in Toronto, and they hired me on the phone, after an interview. And then they hired me again this year for another episode of someone for someone in Victoria. And then they hired me for someone else at the CBC hired me for another documentary piece called Paper Cuts. It's a new series of theirs about paper cut artists. And it's about, I always say with people, it's about who you know, and it's also about, being a nice person. And it's also about being a nice person because, then you get to work with people over and over again. Right.
So. And on those pieces, are you producing and directing and editing and doing everything on those like CBC pieces?
On the CBC pieces, I directed it, I edited it, and I shot the whole thing. I did every single thing. They hired me, and I do the whole thing, and then send it to them, and then I get feedback. And so they're producing it. And then I do the whole thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, it seems like CBC does some really cool projects too.
Yeah, they're like the PBS of Canada, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. They were the original. You had to have them TV network. You know what I mean? For Canada. If you didn't have cable, you at least had the CBC, and you could watch Anne of Green Gables and whatever. And now CBC does Schitt's Creek and shows that are great.
Such a good show.
Yeah.
It's on Netflix in the US, so such a good show.
Yeah.
So Hans, you're kind of in a similar boat because CBC, Canadian Broadcast Company, you've done some work for NPR. And you currently work for KXP, like on a contract, which is technically an NPR station, and you're working on a publicly funded show. How do you tell me a little bit about how you get funding for the work you do?
Yeah. So, it's a lot of, for me, it's like a lot of pitching, right? Just like pitching stories, and then doing them. I guess, I don't know. It's, let me think about a way to, it's just, I mostly work in like public broadcasting, like for public radio stations. The audio world has gotten a little wild in the last 10 years with like podcasting and just how many independent productions there were, like when I started in doing like narrative audio, there was like one game in town and it was public radio. And now it's really has proliferated. But it's just a lot of pitching stories, doing the stories. It's not as, I don't know, TV seems like such a wild, like visual, like narrative storytelling is like, seems so wild to me because I'm so used to just doing like audio. It feels like this whole other world. Whereas like, I guess what I feel like I do is like pretty simple, which is just like find a story. I love telling like character driven stories, like people first, pitch it, like find a place to put it, pitch it to them, record the person, like a bunch of sound, and then like put it together. So I don't know, this is kind of an unsatisfying answer, but it's, I guess that's kind of, a lot of it is just like pitching as like podcasting has become more popular. I've been doing more like corporate work, like corporate podcasting, like branding. And there's definitely, and that kind of funds a lot more of the things that I like want to do, for lack of a better word, like funds a lot more of the sort of like projects that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of as like, this will never make money, or this is like not necessarily like, I guess I think of it in the terms of like, this has a economic sort of like incentive for someone to spend money on it, which is like branding podcasts or like things where people are trying to like be in this is gonna sound so jargony and I'm so sorry, like podcast space. And then there are, and then there are the projects that are the ones that are things that are like stories that I feel like are important, or like people who I think should be heard from, or like perspectives that I think are like valuable.
Yeah, it's very
Like-
similar to what I do, actually.
Yes.
And I think, Jeff, the same with you, because you're really interested in telling stories. This is how we got to this whole West Coast Wonder Woman documentary with the Badass Women series that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we all have that similarity of we like storytelling, we like telling untold stories, and what, you know, whether we do it with a camera or, you know, a microphone or a photo camera, right? You're
Yep.
taking stills and stuff. I think we all have that in common. And I think, like, for me, I always try to say to people too, it's like, don't wait for a paycheck to do what you love. And I've tried to not ever let that stop me. I try to do what I can to tell the stories. So
Yep. And it, like, I feel like it's a constant reminder for me of like, I'm always griping to some, like, it's probably every 6 months I gripe that I don't have something like a tool that I want, because it's not, camera gear can be fun and people geek out over it and whatever. I see it as like very like a toolbox. And so what am I taking to work? And sometimes I have to remind myself that it doesn't matter. Like, I have a bunch of shit that I can use. And so let's go put it to use. And who can we find? Like, Hans, your piece with Lenny Randall is like very quirky. But it's like, it's some time, it's conversation, and it's kind of formatting. And it's took a while for that piece to come together. But when it came together, there was a place you could put it, you know, that was relevant, I guess.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you have to just do it. Like, I guess both of you have been saying this, right? But it's like the feeling of like, this is a story that needs to be told and I need to start telling it now.
Yeah.
Right. That, and it's like, sometimes you don't have the financial, you know, it's like, you don't have the money to do it, but you do what you can. And then, you know, you'll finish it because it is a good story. And it's all about like getting that vision to tape.
And I think that's where it connects to the piece we're working on right now, is because we had some money to get it kind of going, and we've made some trips up there. But, you know, it's been interesting as we've been putting out content. Kelly puts out these really good edits that people are like, this is awesome. I can't wait to see the rest of the piece. And in my head, I'm like, the rest of the piece isn't filmed yet. Like, I too can't wait to see the rest of the piece because I don't know what's going to happen. But
yeah,
I think I think there's a little bit of a perception that I keep wanting to remind people that we're not even halfway done with this. Like, there's a lot more to film and edit. We're like in the middle of that, and we're trying to raise money, but it's really hard to raise money right now. And it was hard, but it's like, show me what you have, you know? So we're waiting on some grants that I got an update today that the grant making cycle is still in progress, that, you know, we're going to hear in May, kind of about that. They're reviewing applications. So, you know, like, some of that money is still kind of going forward. But at the same time, it's like, we got to figure out how to fund this, right? We got to pitch it. Who do we got to pitch it to? Who do we got to talk to? Who do we have to partner with? Like, there's all these ways that we're trying to figure out how to fund it, right? It's not cheap. I mean, it's cheap compared to, you know, an hour of television, or a movie, like you know, what somebody would consider an independent film, or a Hallmark movie that's made in Victoria. It's cheap compared to that.
Well, look, I mean, I think we can break down to what, just for people so they understand what's happening. We are co-director of photography on this. Everything we've shot so far is 2 cameras going at the same time, with direction of, you follow this person, I'll get this side, you get that side. And Hans capturing the audio. And that's it. There's no focus pullers. There's no producer, director standing behind you. You are the director. That's it. So it's, I mean, the nice thing is the crew is so small. So there's that. But I mean, when people are watching these videos, I just want them to kind of know that this isn't, you know, some Hollywood camera crew and the big whatever, someone on a techno crane flying in under. This is me on one side of the ring, you on the other side of the ring. And and then when I'm editing it, you know, trying to link that story together, link those angles together and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really like, I think I totaled it up. I think right now we have like 36 hours of footage, maybe something like that. But
and I look at a documentary series like the Tiger King thing, which I'm sure you guys watched or you're
Yeah.
going to watch. And, I was thinking about how the most important thing about that series was that he followed these characters for a long period of time.
Yep.
And he didn't know when he started following them what was going to happen, obviously, because like it's from 5 years ago. And
Yep.
then, oh my gosh, this is what happens. And it's very similar to what we're doing because we don't know what's going to happen.
Yep.
We're also in a stage where we know that some of these people that we're following may end up in the Olympics.
Yep. Or
Like
professional,
or,
right?
or become
Or
professional
forego the
boxers.
Olympics.
Yep.
And so we don't know the trajectory of the fighters and also what's going to happen with West Coast Wonder Woman. And then this COVID thing gets thrown
Yep.
in. And now what's going to happen with live events and
Yep.
so that's really fascinating. And it is really the cool thing about documentaries, not knowing what's going to happen. So, and being there for it as it unfolds.
Yeah. Yeah. And being present often, right? Like checking in. I feel like that's part of the reason why we're having these conversations by phone with the people in our doc is that we're at least touching base, like staying in touch, trying to figure out how to connect, kind of being up in the know of like what's happening in your world, yeah, because I think of Tiger King. I think of, I don't know if you guys have listened to Dolly Parton's America.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But that he followed Dolly Parton for 2 years.
Yeah.
And I like the first thing he said when he was talking about the story and he said 2 years, I was like, how did he fund it? Right. Kristen was like, my wife missed that kind of piece. And in my head, I was like, I just want to see the production schedule and the production budget because I realize that he is kind of a big deal NPR guy. So it's a little easier for him to get funding, but the time and the money of that is like very fascinating.
Yeah, a whole 2 years of salary or whatever, I'm
Or
sure he's
something.
doing other stuff. Yeah.
Or travel, right? He said he followed her around. So like, what did that cost, right? And so it becomes this thing of like, okay, we kind of have an idea of where West Coast Wonder Woman's going, and we go and start filming that, and then this happens. So now we have to pivot a little bit, or at least be open to the fact that because of COVID-19, the story is going to shift a little bit. I feel like we would be like very tone deaf and like if we didn't acknowledge that this is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the story, like it affects the story for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Olympics moving, right? Like, I think there's all these other things, right? Are kind of show a lot about this sport. And kind of the like financial constraints, like the things that are underneath it. So
for sure. And now Kelly brings in her pup as we finish out.
She actually entered the scene and started whining for attention. So we can't ignore that.
We are all in our own homes. We're not in big fancy studios, and we all live in very modest apartments.
Yeah.
So on that note,
please fund the project, everyone. Please support this project. More than anything, please share these videos and tell people, and subscribe to the channel and tell people about what we're doing. Subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go to allfemalecard.film, follow along, join the newsletter, tell your friends. I really want the boxing community to get around this documentary series. Female filmmakers, of female boxers, people that are into sports, people that love WrestleMania. I don't care. Just we want people to get it. Share what we're doing essentially. Which is why we're doing all this, right? Yeah.
And of all the times, like this is the time where it's really important. After that conversation with Maggie, it was like very, it wasn't eye-opening, but it was just like kind of hammered home the point that like, of all the times we need to be making sure that women's sport and the conversation around equity, and equality in sport and in in the world, like we need to make sure that conversation is not drowned out, and that maybe this is an opportunity to reset kind of the playing field for everybody. So yeah, I think we have a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out over the next couple of weeks. And we'll put out a new newsletter that will have some behind the scenes content. So definitely subscribe to our newsletter on allfemalecard.film. And then we're going to figure out some ways to engage with people, whether it's giving out t-shirts or writing postcards or sending photos. Like we actually do want to build community around this. So find ways to connect with us, subscribe to our channels on YouTube. We'll have a podcast coming out that Hans is really pushing, and we'll touch base here in a couple of weeks. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Jeff. Bye, Kelly. Hello.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.